Welcome back, everyone, to the Disaster Tough podcast, where we share insights into the big plays and right calls of leadership. We dive deep into the stories, lessons learned, and ideas that will help you in the field. Let's go. Welcome back to the Disaster Tough podcast. I'm your host, John Scardina. I am so excited for this episode for so many reasons. I have Retired General Mike Willis on here. He's also the State Director of Colorado's Emergency Management Agency. Very excited to have all these different perspectives and understanding on the show. As you may know from our recent posts on social media, I'm going and chatting with NATO in just a few days and get to learn a lot more from our military counterparts. I'm a huge fan of our military and what they can provide during disasters, specifically of what I provide in those type 1 incidents. However, Mike has such a unique perspective because he's done so many different things in the field, not just the military perspective, but now he's been dealing with multiple types of incidents in Colorado, including, I hope we get to talk about it right off the bat, a ransomware attack that started right when he became the state director of Colorado. So really just fascinating perspective, going from cyber all the way through COVID to wildfires, everything else in between. So without any further ado, Mike, welcome to the show.
Thanks, John. Glad to be here this morning.
You know, it's a special opportunity to hear from you and to learn from your perspective, given the complexities of Colorado with adjacent to NORCOM, of which I work with. I've shouted out them a few times. I've had General McKinney on the show, but also from the emergency management perspective. We've had PIOs from Colorado on here before. We've talked about different incidents, winter incidents, wildfire incidents. At the same time, I had no idea, and I said this before the show, I couldn't believe you were there the whole time while we were talking about the incidents, and I should have been chatting with you. So with that, just from my audience perspective, I try to give a little bit of a background, but could you give a background for our audience sake?
Yeah, sure, John. We were chatting just before the show started. I started out active duty Army, was on active duty, stationed both in stateside at Fort Bliss and then overseas as well. Spent some time in Germany. Was deployed to, I'm old enough to have deployed to Desert Shield and Desert Storm. Did a peacekeeping tour in Bosnia and then deployed again in 2003, 2004 back to Iraq. After 10 years on active duty, I went to and joined the Colorado National Guard, where I was fortunate enough to be a full-time National Guardsman. And I finished out my career as a Colorado Guardsman for about 20 years and retired in 2018. I've been the state director here in Colorado now for a little over 6 years. And as you suggested, I've seen quite a few and several non-traditional incidents in my time here in Colorado. We've had the more traditional natural disasters. In my time, we've had major disaster declarations under the Stafford Act for fires and floods, but we also I was the co-incident commander for COVID with a public health director, and as you mentioned, was the incident commander for a ransomware attack on our Department of Transportation in 2018. So kind of seen a pretty wild gamut of things that maybe when the emergency management was first formed, we didn't really consider emergency manager business, but now it really is.
You know, when I was with FEMA, I felt like 90%, and honestly, it changed quite a bit over the years, but I really felt like I was majority a hurricane response team that also became a like kind of a wildfire response team.
Yeah, sure.
And during that time, there was a lot of other incidents, but really it was like hurricanes, wildfires. And after like the third or fourth hurricane, while still brutal and still taxing on time and energy and all those things, I understood the job. You know where the water's going to go. You know the type
Right.
of things that are in. And so the challenge of the incident type um, changed to being focused more on the people type, right? Like how do different cultures react to different disaster types?
Sure.
From the incident perspective, and we can talk about the people in a little bit, but from the incident perspective, I'm sure with so many different like unique and untraditional disaster types, especially with the cyber attack and with COVID, they're challenging in different ways, right? From I want to say from like a geek perspective, but from like a disaster responder perspective, which one challenged you in a way that I want to say gets you excited, but you know what I mean? Like it got you like, okay, these are definitely new problem sets, new puzzles that we got to figure out. Which one tested you probably the most?
I think two kind of come to mind as most challenging. Certainly, COVID. COVID had this political aspect to it, this politicalization of the incident that made it really, really challenging. The ransomware attack didn't have that. Everyone agreed uh, on the cause, and everyone agreed on what the right things to do were, and everyone agreed on what we thought the outcome ought to be. So establishing, creating unity of effort in the ransomware attack was not particularly hard. Tackling the problem, that was challenging, but getting everyone on the same on the same azimuth was not. It was far more challenging in COVID because of the wide opinions on what the outcome should be, what the approaches should be, and a lot of disagreement, both within government and within society, which we didn't face at all at the ransomware attack. So that made COVID much more complex and made outcomes of any course of action much more difficult to predict or to anticipate how communities would react to anything we did. We got, and I know a lot of state directors probably had the same experience, right? You would make a decision, pursue a course of action. Some communities would respond in one way, and other communities would respond in a different way. And then you kind of had to regroup to find ways that would work to achieve outcomes, and not everyone agreed on what the outcome ought to be. And so John, that added a level of complexity that we didn't experience in the ransomware attack.
The L3 Harris Extreme 400P radio solves problems and is specifically designed for emergency services. How do we know? We field tested it with medical, urban search and rescue, and collapse and confined structures. This radio is amazingly tough. Check out the L3 Harris Extreme 400P radio at l3harris.com right now. If you served in the military, you've probably worn Proper Apparel. Proper Apparel is now reaching out to first responders and those who love the outdoors. Check out Proper Apparel. From the outdoors to the EOC, wear proper. How do you spell Doberman Emergency Management? EOP, OEP, HVA, HMP, Thyra, TTX, Drone, PDA. Whenever you need an expert, Doberman Emergency Management field experts are there for support. Contact an expert at DobermanEMG.com today. So I started COVID the first year of COVID, like 2020. I was in California. We moved to St. Louis around July of 2021.
Okay.
And the cultural change of what to do during that time. But also a lot of guidance had changed from CDC. Like, I helped write the reopening school plan for public schools for California. So they wanted schools to be open, but they wanted to do antigen testing, but other stuff. Here it was completely different, right? A very different cultural perspective of what to do and how to do it. And I'm talking about from the EM side. I'm talking about from the general public side, obviously, which you're getting to. From the Colorado perspective, politically, it's been in the news a lot, right? And so obviously there's multiple cultures, multiple political opinions. How do you navigate that? And from a general sense, in any state, as a state director, you have requirements as a state director to do things. You work for the governor, right? At the same time, you are supporting the citizens and you want to save people's lives. Absolutely. How do you manage? I mean, what I say, and this is kind of a tangent, but what I say is anytime a disaster becomes political, you just lost. But every disaster is political in some regard. So how do you specifically manage public, private, government, CDC guidance, even like all these different complexities that you're trying to deal with where did you find successes?
I think navigating those political kind of more political incidents, it can be really challenging. And I think what I tried to do is really stick to what we could establish as facts, and that was really hard in COVID. Um, Finding the facts and the facts would change, which that's okay. In complex incidents, the environment evolves and facts do change. But I think that the key is to, for a state director, is to really try to be that steady hand and not really get sucked into the political conversations. I was sometimes in the room when the conversation would get political, but I tended not to take a side on that and say, look, let's get back to working the problem. I recognize and appreciate that there are, sometimes there's a political need to blame somebody. But I worked really hard to say that's not my role. It's not my role to figure out whose fault this is. It's my role to figure out what we're going to do about the problem. And really hard to do, but I think a state director has an obligation to be the guy who focuses on the problem. He or she has to have kind of that steady look. I can't let myself get dragged into this blame game because that doesn't solve problems. Any state director, in many cases, any local director is going to be in the room when those things happen. And I just kind of took a step back. And sometimes I was asked what my opinion was. And usually my answer was, I don't really have an opinion on that. And I just need to focus on, what is and what we need to do.
I think of two things. I always like the phrase, everybody's entitled to an opinion and they have the right to keep it to themselves.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah, like it's, everybody's allowed to have an opinion, but I mean, what is that opinion based off of it? And it's incredibly wise to just take a deep breath and just look at the data and focus on the thing that matters. I got some great advice from Pete Gaynor about avoiding the distractions, and we just had him on a webinar. We called it the Ides of March. The whole thing, we always avoid politics in EM, but politics is inherently built into EM.
Right.
And so we had him on there, and he's the most apolitical guy in the world. He is so good about avoiding anything that gets remotely, questionable when it comes to politics.
Sure.
And have a true masterclass in that. And so I said, hey, let's do an entire webinar on politics. And he was like, you're kidding, right? I said, no, I actually absolutely want to talk about it. And so, he gave some great advice on that webinar about politics. And basically, he was saying the same things you're saying, right? Like the only thing that matters is the problem. There's all these distractions politically. They're going to go on the news. They're going to blame somebody. They have to,
Sure.
right? They got to save the butt. But for us, if we get dragged into that, and I've seen every once in a while, I'll see an EM, especially a director, get pulled into that. I'm like, you're not going to survive the next change because you just attached yourself to somebody, whatever that somebody is. So it's just fascinating to hear that from you. I have a question about the transition from military service to civil service, and something that I've been trying to address, and you've already kind of hinted at it with your stance on, trying to read the room. I have found it's kind of like the cultures conversation, the culture of civil EM versus like military, or, I did a stint in tech. I've met so many wonderful, amazing, professional emergency managers. However, I find often, and I'm actually finding it's getting dangerously worse, that people are pulling away as emergency management as a profession. They're afraid of standardization. They're afraid of, the baselines. Hey, what if I don't meet the baselines? Instead of saying I'll learn them if I don't have them, they're saying I don't want them. From somebody who was in such a rigid, highly professional, you know exactly what you're getting when you go there. Maybe personalities change, of course, people change their jobs, but I mean, they literally have a camp called Basics, right? Like you have to go through basic training. When you switched over to civilian side, was it difficult for you to see that lack, or did you not find that to be true? How, how do you? What would be your advice to helping our field become more professional?
Yeah.
I guess that's what I'm trying to get to.
I think that's a real challenge for our field, and had the opportunity to participate in uh, FEMA's Vanguard program, which really does take on really tough questions like that one. And what is the right level of professionalization for the emergency management field, and what does that even mean? And I think, generally we all agree that one of the most challenging components, really across all of state government, but certainly true in the emergency management field, is that while there are some some real good baseline emergency management technical courses to become proficient in each of the 5 mission areas, you can, there's institutional training for those things, but where we really don't have a good and appropriate level of institutional training is in the leadership side
Yes.
of emergency management. And I remember when I first started in this role as state director, I was complaining to my wife that I was a little frustrated with a person who had really strong technical emergency management skills, but wasn't really stepping up.
Hmm.
And I was bouncing that off my wife, and she looked at me and she said, "Well, why would they? No one ever taught them to do that." And I got to contemplating that. And I thought, yeah, that's a really interesting point, because before anyone ever allowed me to lead a platoon, I had to go to a 9-month school.
Yes.
And I wasn't allowed to lead a battery until I went back to another school. So by the time I was 26, I'd gone to 2 leadership schools, had more leadership training than anyone in the state government will ever have.
Yes.
And I think that's a real challenge for our emergency management community, because in many cases, in nearly all cases, the emergency manager is the one who's looked at to step up and lead. We've never prepared them to do that.
Isn't that hilarious?
Uh,
It's like scary to me, to be honest.
yeah, and it's like, why would we expect them to succeed? We never did anything to ensure they had the tools to do that. So
Yeah.
that's a real problem across the enterprise right now. We're working in Colorado, actually with Pete Daner, to develop an internal program to help overcome that, to develop our younger emergency managers, not as technical professionals, because that will come, but as leaders.
Yes.
So I think that's really where the field needs to make big strides, is in institutionalizing leadership training.
So I have about 47 rapid fire comments I want to make to that, and I'll try to stick it to 3. But I agree 100%. I was very fortunate in both my undergrad at Utah Valley and at Georgetown to have practitioners really focus on, as educators, to really focus on leadership. And so much so that by the time I went to Georgetown, when they were like, "Hey, we're going to talk about 17 different types of leadership," I cringed inside. I was so worried that I was about to be in a terrible program that was just like my undergrad or something, and it turned out to be phenomenal. It was such a great 6 years of just, hey, this is how you lead. At the same time, I was in other leadership positions, and so I was able to apply as I was learning, but there was no real option. The Vanguard program is awesome. Shout out to Jeff Stern, who's been on here,
Yeah,
and Pete. Yeah, absolutely. And everything that they're trying to accomplish there. Both Jeff and Pete were at our last dynamic populations course, and I'm going to get on a soapbox here real fast, because my audience is probably tired of me saying this, but I'm going to say it for you because we're new. But my company, under the Readiness Lab, we created a course called Emergency Management Response for Dynamic Populations, specifically to teach them leadership. And the way that we figured out how to do it was to put them in a non-public safety role where they would have to answer to senior leadership, have all the responsibility, none of the authority. So if they screw up, everybody's going to know, and
Right.
you're fired. So the idea was that we actually took it from a USAR model of training, where it's 3 days. The first 2 days are basically we bring in people like Pete and maybe yourself in the future to teach them like in the morning. So the morning is all discussion based. In the afternoon, it's all tabletop exercises. And so they're starting to go through security, evacuations, mass care, CBRN, which they usually have no understanding on, which is intentional, and public relations. Another thing EMs are always asked to do, and they have no training on, by the way.
Right. Right.
Um, and so we take them through these 6 things, and then we put them in typically a professional stadium, like we were in Bush Stadium, or we'll take them to the Timber Stadium. We have a Timbers contract. And during that, like 12-hour exercise, we will do a CBRN terrorist attack on the stadium. But the emergency manager represents the stadium. They don't represent public safety.
Ah,
And so what do you do when you have to look at 22,000 people who are being attacked, but you can't call in for any resource? You can request a bunch of different stuff,
sure.
but if you are in charge of security, but you're not security, they have a whole apparatus for security officers, right? If you're in charge of evacuating the stadium, even when fire and police go in there and coordinating that with them, it becomes a pure coordination role and just organizing and leadership capability. Funny enough, because it's counterterrorism, we got DHS and a bunch of other people really excited about it, but
Right.
it wasn't the original intent. The original intent was take mid-level emergency managers and honestly, if I'm going to be brutally honest, like directors of federal agencies and saying, hey, this is how you actually do the job. This is how you actually lead. And it's been really fun. We've done it now multiple years. I think we're going to Denver actually in September.
Great.
Yeah, which is pretty exciting. So hopefully you can make it. But there's all this like really exciting things that come out of it. And surprisingly, the number one thing or number two thing maybe that's come out of it is we've had fire, police, EMS take it. We've had hospital administrators take it. And they're like, oh, I didn't know emergency management could do this for me.
Right.
And that has been a tell for me that we need to get better at the coordination piece. We bring in all these different resources and people come in, but maybe it doesn't need to be that. And it's truly a lack of understanding of leadership. Everybody takes the 300 courses from FEMA, but they don't
Right.
really know how to apply them.
Right.
Anyways, like I said, it's a soapbox moment for me, but I hear you loud and clear, and I hope our audience hears loud and clear. Like, it's time that we step up on the leadership piece. From what you're doing with Pete in Colorado, could you share some insights that maybe other people in other parts of the country could apply on how, if they're listening, like, you're right, I've been in this job for 5 years, I have had no leadership training. What
Yeah.
would be your advice on getting them there?
Well, I think the first thing you have to do is that's like anything else, right? First, you have to, identify the problem in your own agency, right? Like you have to admit to yourself that we don't do this well, and say it's not okay that we don't do this well. That's really the first step because I think in a lot of cases, um, emergency management agencies are like, well, okay, yeah, we don't do that, but whatever, I'm busy. Um,
Yeah.
and really, the first step is to take a good, honest, hard look at yourself and say, we don't do this. And we need to be deliberate about it and then go about creating a deliberate program that you can, that you can deliver. It's really hard. And the resources aren't just right there for you. You have to find the right resources. You have to be willing to spend some money. And it's, there's not, one of the big difference between the Army and this problem is the Army will hand that to you.
Hmm.
If you're an emergency management director and you decide to take this problem on, there's nothing, there's no program that you just go, okay, I'm going to go buy that.
Yeah.
And so you have to really be committed to developing that and finding the resources. Pete's leading in crisis is, that's a
Phenomenal.
tremendous resource that we're leveraging, but it's just a piece of the program. And then the other thing that so that's step one, is to get really deliberate about it. Write it in your strategic plan. Hopefully, you have a strategic plan,
Mm.
and hold yourself accountable to doing a leadership development program. And then the other thing is look for opportunities that the people who work for you, the up and coming, the future leaders can take on and lead, where you can manage the risk, the exposure to them, but they get the experience of learning to be a leader. There's a couple of ways you can do that. Um, I'm always pretty thoughtful about who I ask the governor to appoint as the deputy state coordinating officer,
Interesting.
um, and give somebody the experience. And then I let the deputy, I don't let them, I make the deputy do a lot of things that are thoughtful in the fact that, yes, I could do those. Um, but I don't want to miss the opportunity to give the deputy that experiential learning in a leadership role where I'm still the safety net.
Mm.
And if it starts to go off course, it's okay. If they make mistakes, they can be managed and brought back in line. So directors have to be deliberate in thinking about creating those opportunities, because no one's going to say, "Hey, Mike, you really should give so and so a shot." No one's ever going to say that to a director. You have to realize that yourself, and then when and I certainly have this experience, and others will too, where somebody says, "Well, why is so and so leading the meeting and not you?" Because I'm pretty good at leading meetings, and I'm too old. I'm not the future of emergency management.
Why
But
would
hey,
somebody ever say that to you? I think that's the most rude thing you can ever say. Hey, why aren't you leading this? Hey, shut up. Let the other guy do it. Yeah.
yeah, it's because I don't need to. So those are two things I think that we're not particularly good at as an
Mm.
enterprise. And really, if we got deliberate about, creating programs like Pete's, and then we got deliberate about giving people experiential opportunity, then I think we could move the needle pretty far on the leadership problem.
Step one, honestly, is every state should get their emergency management programs access to Pete's course. I think I've
Yeah.
seen part of it in person, and I know about it from the back end side of it because he was working through it, and I think he was very deliberate on issues that he found in the field and wanted to address those in a
Right.
positive and helpful way. And it sounds like you've been deliberate as well. Uh, one of the one of the issues or problem sets that I have found, and this has been at times with myself. We've all gone through this. Maybe not. You seem very humble, but uh, there's like this hubris that happens, and like the worst thing I've seen is when you go to a training and everyone says, "Don't fight the exercise," but the exercise is terrible, and everyone
Yeah.
lives. I've never been to a disaster where every single person lived. And
Yeah.
and then they all pat themselves in the back saying, "Hey, we did a great job." And you might come up with an after action and maybe so the problems that for me, like the core of that, and I could be wrong, is we as an enterprise need to get better at data science and analytics, including the self-evaluation analytics of, "Hey, I think I did really good, but oh, none of my stakeholders didn't work with me, but they just don't get it." And it's like, are you sure they just don't get it, or are you just not explaining it very well? Like the easiest tell for me is if I ever need to improve is if the people I work with are dismissing the work that I'm doing. If they're dismissing the work that I'm doing, therefore I have missed the mark on something. Either I'm not valuable to them or I've not articulated it in a way that's helpful for them. I don't know. What's some data points that can help somebody say, "Hey, I'm either doing really good or there's maybe some points of improvement here."
Yeah. That's a great question. And
Make you
and
think.
it's Yeah, it's a difficult one. One, I agree with your, the way you described our exercises, that we make them, make them too easy. We certainly struggled with that.
Or
What?
everybody goes to the nuke. It's either like the
Yeah,
nuke and
yeah.
nobody can win, or
It's either everyone dies or no one dies.
yeah,
Uh, and so, you know, I did work pretty hard with my team to get us to the point where we kind of adapted a little bit different philosophy where we understood that exercising to the point of failure is important.
yes,
Um, you can't end the exercise if you're still winning. That's not constructive, but it does create a significant challenge sometimes for our stakeholders that can be uncomfortable in that environment and may feel that if there's if that point of failure happens in their particular emergency support function, that they that kind of exposure could really be scary for them. And you have to spend a lot of time reassuring people that um, failure during an exercise is really important, because that's how you avoid failure during a real incident. That is a hard sell
mm,
to a lot of our stakeholders. Um, but the risk of not doing that, kind of gets at your point, John, where you create an exercise that's so easy that no one cares,
yeah,
and they're just like, well, whatever, man. Um, it is also incumbent on the emergency management community to put things in contexts and phrase things in ways that the other stakeholders understand. And that's not easy. Um, you can say the same thing to your public health partner that you said to your law enforcement partner. They didn't hear the same thing,
mm,
even though you said the same thing.
yeah,
And so the art of contextualizing your exercise or whatever you're saying to your audience is a real important skill for an emergency manager. And I found myself repeating guidance to two different communities, and I feel like, geez, I'm saying the same thing, but I'm really careful to phrase it differently.
mm.
uh, the, the old adage that the author always understands his or her work, right?
I love that.
I understand everything I wrote perfectly.
Yeah,
uh, and then kind of figuring out a way to get feedback. And some of that feedback is uh, nonverbal.
mm-hmm.
Um, what I do find now in this kind of post-COVID world is the more people that are joining remotely or online, the less interested they are.
Mm.
And you're probably doing it wrong. If they want to be in the room, you're probably on the right track, um, because it's so easy remote to allow yourself to go do other things. I look like I'm paying attention, but I got 5 windows open on my 3 screens, and I'm really not engaged. So, I kind of use that as a temperature check. And, all right, I asked my exercise chief to, tell me how many folks are coming and going to be in the room versus how many are going to be online. And if I feel like the number's too high, I say, well, we gotta change something. We gotta do something a little differently in the exercise to get them to want to come to the room.
Sure.
Um, Not every program has an exercise person. Mine didn't when I started, uh,
Interesting. Did
and
not.
so it did not. We did not have a.
Strange.
So all the exercises were designed by the participants, because I didn't have a person to design the exercises. We do now, and I encourage all programs to have, and I know that's challenging, but if you can set aside a specific position for your exercise and training person, that goes a long way.
One
Plus,
of my
they tend to be motivated to come up with crazy good exercises, right? Like, I really want to put these people through the paces.
it's
They're
fun, right?
yeah, a little diabolical, if you got the right person.
So you mentioned Bosnia earlier. One of my all-time favorite mentors, Rodney Melsick, he's like the original emergency planner. He's been around forever. He just wrote a book. If you've ever done the planning P anywhere in the world, he was the guy who evangelized it globally. So really cool guy. But he would always say that emergency managers have diminishing skills. And it was always bewildering to him and now to me of why exercises get cut first every time. And
Yeah.
I get it from a logistical standpoint. You have real needs, you got to buy things for the community. But if you don't exercise, you have a problem. My other thing is, I've really come to learn and appreciate from military, and this is probably why you're so good at this, from military and really specifically USAR counterparts, is the idea of training before the exercise. We want to get people confident and understanding what they're actually supposed to do, and then exercise to the point of failure, seeing where the gaps are, and then retrain based off of those gaps and get better and better and better. And what I found, like, I'm going to call out FEMA a little bit, and I'm a FEMA guy. I like FEMA, but every single hurricane exercise was a no notice in the middle of the night hurricane. And as a data guy, I'm like, you would know that's coming 5 days out every
Yeah.
single
Right.
time. So, like, let's test something out maybe. But the idea was to test readiness. And if you're going to test readiness, there's so many different ways to do that. We work with like I think I kind of mentioned a little bit before we started talking, but we work with universities, with states, with the DoD, whatever. And a lot of what we provide is exercise planning and really like assessment. So we do an assessment, we do a training, we do an exercise, assessment, training, and exercise. And we'll work with them. And it's so much fun to watch people start. They get a little confidence, which you need, by the way. Then you put them through a problem set, but then you put them through training and you say, hey, you're good at these things. Let's get better at the other things. And you walk through over a couple of years, and all of a sudden, these people are just rock stars about it's not so much the problem set, but it's be able to walk through, and articulate the different problem sets. The very last thing I'm going to mention here is because you said so many incredible things is, again, the words matter. Basically, you're saying that, and how, you can be saying the same thing versus the other person. One of the issues that I found as I started working with so many other groups is that I was saying vernacular that we typically use in emergency management, like resiliency, preparedness. Another word that, we use lots of words that we think we know what they mean. Protection, even. Oh my gosh, that's a whole other word. But when you look at the English definition of the words, it's like, we're not using these words correctly.
Right.
And there's an acronym thing in our world, and that's the thing. But when we're speaking the same language, we have to use the words with what they mean in the dictionary. Otherwise, the stakeholder's not going to know what that means. So, that's kind of a call out to branding, to messaging, to all these different things is, let's not make people have to bounce back. Let's mitigate first, kind of thing. Right. So, anyways, soapbox moments, lots of here. I agree with everything you're saying. You're obviously very well versed. We always do this thing at the very end of our podcast. We have a lot of emergency managers, young firefighters, young law enforcement who are looking to get into EM. And so we ask the leader to provide some advice that they've learned in their career to be able to pass on to like the rising generation. What advice would you give to somebody who's looking to just to get into EM, even if they have a storied career in the military? What would be your step one, step two kind of thing?
I think the first thing I would say is you do a self-assessment, inventory your skills. What are you good at and what are you not good at? Be real honest about that. And then go about focusing on the areas that you're not good at. What I think people will find is that they're not good at the things they don't like. Therefore, they don't want to get better at it because they don't like it. You have to get over that. And you have to be willing to, be really honest with yourself and improve in the areas you're not good at. And I think a lot of it, comes back to leadership. I would tell young emergency managers, there's a lot of opportunities to refine and hone your skills in the technical aspects of emergency management. But if you are real honest with yourself and you find that you don't have the right background, skill set, experiences to lead people, then focus on that. Find opportunities, either through education or through experiential learning, to put yourself in uncomfortable places, and work hard to improve those areas that you aren't good at. That'll get you a long way. And I love when people sit with me for an interview for a position, and they say, "Look, I'm really terrible at this one thing, and here are the things that I'm doing to overcome that." I'm like, "Oh, because we're all terrible at something."
Oh, yeah.
And usually we're terrible at stuff we don't like. And so it means a lot to me when they say, "Look, I'm working really hard to overcome this," because I kind of know you probably don't like doing it. And I appreciate and respect that you are willing to take that on. So I would encourage our young folks to really be brutally honest with themselves, and then focus on areas where they say, "Look, I don't have that experience or the right education for that, and I'm going to fix that."
It's like the mic drop moment. I am constantly reminded by areas of improvement, and it's going to sound like a joke, but it's not a joke. Marriage has been the number one tool for me to learn that I need to be a better person because I'm married to such an incredible person.
Sure.
And all the different areas that are uncomfortable that I need to get better in, she is so good in all those areas. And so I'm an amazing person to learn from. And so that would be my only piggyback to that, is try to find a mentor who's actually good at the things that you're terrible at. It sounds like you're an awesome state director and you're doing incredible things between exercises and putting people in uncomfortable roles and making them get better and identifying leadership skills. You're doing all the things. And it sounds like you're probably a really great mentor for a lot of people where you're at. If you're listening to this podcast, I'm going to keep going because you're so great. If you're listening to this podcast, try to find a mentor. And like I said, Pete Gaynor's course is a great place because he can be kind of your step one mentor, but try to find somebody active in your life to mentor you. That's my only advice there.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, John. I certainly have had the benefit of several really great mentors along my way.
All right. So with that, again, Mike, thanks for joining me on the podcast. Everyone, if you got something out of this podcast, which you should have, if you were listening and didn't have the 3 monitors up like he was talking about, you should like and subscribe, the whole deal. If you have a question, either for Mike or about some of the principles we were talking about, reach out to the community, ask on social media. You can always send us an email at contact@the Readiness Lab. We can pass it on to Mike if you have a question there for something personal. And if there's a job opening in Colorado, you should definitely apply because Mike's an awesome state director. And with that, we'll see you for the next one. Peace.